My mother's dying wish was for me to marry my best friend's Fiancé, and behind this request lies a secret that could destroy us all. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room made my stomach churn as I leaned closer to hear her whispered words. Mom's fingers, now skeletal and pale, clutched my wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll marry Ethan after I am gone," she rasped, her eyes suddenly clear and focused, despite the morphine drip. "You have to take him away from Zoe, it's the only way to make things right," I jerked back, certain I'd misheard her. "Mom, what are you talking about? Ethan is Zoe's fiancé. They're getting married in 3 months. Zoe's been my best friend since we were kids." The cardiac monitor beeped steadily beside us, its rhythm a stark contrast to the chaotic thoughts whirling in my head. My mother had never been vindictive or cruel. This request was so wildly out of character that I wondered if the medication was making her confused. "Meyer," she said, her voice gaining urgency, "you don't understand. Here is so much you don't know about your father, about Zoe's family." A coughing fit interrupted her words, and I quickly reached for the water cup on the bedside table. "Mom, please rest. We can talk about this later," I said, even as fear crept up my spine. In 29 years, my mother had never mentioned my father beyond saying he wasn't worth knowing. Now, as her life ebbed away, she suddenly wanted to discuss him. "There isn't going to be a later," she whispered after taking a small sip. "I should have told you years ago, but I was ashamed, afraid. But now." Her eyes drifted to the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. "Death has a way of clarifying priorities." "Tell me what, Mom? You are scaring me?" I squeezed her frail hand between mine. She turned back to me, her gaze intense. "Here's a blue box in the back of my closet. Implied is everything you need to understand. But tacit, promise me you'll keep Ethan away from Zoe. That family has already taken too much from us." The door swung open before I could respond, and a nurse bustled in, followed by Zoe herself, her eyes red-rimmed but her smile genuine as she carried a small bouquet of sunflowers, my mother's favorite. "How's our patient today?" Zoe asked brightly, but her smile faltered when she saw my expression. My mother's grip tightened painfully around my fingers as she shot a look of pure loathing at Zoe, something I'd never seen before. In all the years Zoe had been part of our lives, Mom had always welcomed her with open arms. What could have possibly changed? "Get her out," Mom hissed, her voice barely audible. "Don't trust her, Tazich. Don't trust any of them." Zoe froze mid-step, confusion washing over her face. "Mrs. Donovan, it's me, Zoe." "Mom, and please calm down," I pleaded as the cardiac monitor began to beep more rapidly. "Zoe's here to help. She cares about you, cares." Mom's laugh was bitter and broken. "Ask her father about caring. Ask him about July 1994. Ask him about the cabin and what he did." The nurse moved quickly to check Mom's vitals as her breathing grew more labored. "I think we need to step out and let her rest," she suggested firmly, concern etched on her face. As we backed toward the door, my mother called out one last time, her voice suddenly strong and clear. "The truth is in the box, Dishes. The DNA test results, everything. Impress me, you'll make this right." She died 3 hours later, taking her explanations with her and leaving me with a mystery I never asked for and a promise I couldn't possibly keep. Or so I thought. I had no idea that attending my mother's funeral would reveal secrets darker than her dying request, or that within a week I'd find myself questioning everything I knew about my best friend, her fiancé, and most disturbingly, my own identity. The day we buried my mother, the sky opened up as if the heavens themselves were mourning. Her funeral was small, just me, a handful of colleagues from the elementary school where she'd taught for 20 years, and Zoe, who hadn't left my side since Mom died despite the bizarre hostility Mom had shown her at the end. Ethan stood slightly apart, his tall frame hunched against the rain, looking uncomfortable in his black suit. He'd only met my mother a few times, mostly at group dinners where Zoe had dragged him along. Still, he'd insisted on coming to support both of us. "She loved you so much, Tacit," Zoe whispered as we watched the casket being lowered. "Whatever happened at the hospital? That wasn't your mom, that was the pain talking." I nodded mechanically, but Mom's final words echoed in my head. "The truth is in the box. The DNA test results." Asterisk, Zoe, I said suddenly, turning to face her. "Did your dad ever mention knowing my mom before you and I became friends?" A puzzled look crossed her face. "No. Why would he?" "They met at my 10th birthday party when you brought her, remember?" She squeezed my hand. "Tasked, you've been through a lot. Let's get you home, actually," I said, pulling away slightly. "I need some time alone to process everything." Hurt flashed across her face, but Ethan stepped forward, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Give her space, Doe." Examining Greaves differently, something in his voice made me look up. Our eyes met briefly, and for a second I thought I saw understanding there, as if he somehow knew what burden my mother had placed on my shoulders. Ridiculous, of course, I was projecting, seeing connections where none existed. Back at my mother's house. My house now, I supposed. I went straight to her bedroom. The blue box wasn't difficult to find, tucked behind winter sweaters just as she'd said. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a neat stack of papers, photographs, and what appeared to be old letters. On top was a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's elegant script. I sat on the edge of her bed, the box beside me, and opened the envelope first. "Biap, my dearest Hastrisk Sen, if you are reading this, I've run out of time to tell you face to face. For that I am profoundly sorry. Some truths are too heavy to bear alone, and I forced you to carry this one without proper preparation. Send the man you believed was your father, the one who abandoned us when you were a baby, is not your biological father. Richard Halloway is, yes, Zoe's father. The letter slipped from my fingers as my world tilted on its axis. Richard Halloway, the distinguished surgeon who'd always been politely distant with me. Zoe's father was a Temmie father. That would make Zoe and me half-sisters. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. All those years of calling each other soul sisters, and we'd been actual sisters all along. But then the implications hit me like a physical blow. If Richard was my father, that meant he'd cheated on Zoe's mother, the elegant, soft-spoken Patricia who'd always treated me with kindness. Or had my mother been the other woman, the thought made me physically ill. With shaking hands, I reached for the box again. Near the bottom, I found a folder labeled DNA Test -2023. Implied was a clinical-looking report confirming a parent-child relationship between Richard Halloway and Tadish Donovan me. This was recent. Mom had known for less than a year, but why had she tested in the first place, and what did any of this have to do with Ethan? As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "We're worried about you. Ethan wants to drop by with some dinner, just him. I've got that charity event tonight, okay?" I stared at the message, my mother's spinal request playing on repeat in my mind. "Promise me you'll marry Ethan after I am gone. You have to take him away from Zoe." What secrets was Ethan hiding? And what did he have to do with the tangled web between my mother and the Halloways? I typed back a simple response. "And that would be nice, hacks. Sometimes. The only way to uncover the truth is to face the people who might be hiding it, even if doing so means betraying the one person who's never betrayed you." Ethan arrived at 7, balancing takeout containers, and wearing an expression of such genuine concern that my suspicions felt suddenly ridiculous. What was I thinking? That he was somehow complicit in whatever had happened between my mother and Richard Halloway nearly 3 decades ago. "Zoe wanted to come," he said as I led him to the kitchen, "but I convinced her you might need some space. She can be intense when she's worried. That's an understatement." I managed a weak smile. "Remember when I had that flu last year? She practically moved in. She loves you." He set the food down and began unpacking containers of that food, my favorite, I noticed. "Not Zoe's. You are the sister she never had?" My stomach clenched at his choice of words. Ironic. You should say that. His dark eyebrows drew together. "What do you mean?" For a moment I considered showing him everything. The letter, the DNA test, all of it. But some instinct held me back. Nothing. Just grief makes you think strange thoughts. We ate in companionable silence for a while. I'd always felt comfortable around Ethan, which had surprised me when Zoe first started dating him 3 years ago. Real, I felt awkward around her boyfriends, like a third wheel, but Ethan had immediately treated me like I belonged, so he said, finally setting down his fork, "Are you going to tell me what's really going on? I saw your face at the hospital when your mom was talking to you. Before Zoe and I came in, I froze. You were there. I was waiting in the hallway. Zoe wanted to give you two some privacy first, but He hesitated. "I overheard some of what your mom said to you." The blood rushed to my face. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know she asked something impossible of you." His eyes, a deep amber brown, held mine steadily. "Something about me." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Ethan, I know that." He reached across the table and touched my hand briefly, "but I also know Catherine Donovan wasn't a malicious woman. If she asked you to interfere in my relationship with Zoe, she must have had a powerful reason." I pulled away, suddenly needing distance. "I found some things after the funeral letters, a DNA test." The words spilled out before I could stop them. Ethan's face drained of color so completely that for a second I thought he might pass out. "You are sure?" I nodded. "Which means Zoe is my half-sister, and for some reason no one ever told either of us." He stood abruptly, turning to face the window above the sink. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "Here is more to this than you know, Tassis. More than I knew until recently." "What are you talking about, Ethan? What do you know?" He turned back slowly. 2 months ago, my mother gave me a box of my father's things. He died when I was a baby. At least, that's what I was always told. But among his possessions was a journal, and in it he swallowed hard. He wrote about an affair he had in 1993 with a woman named Catherine. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. "My mother? I think so. And if the timelines match up." His voice trailed off, the implication hanging in the air between us. "That's impossible," I whispered, even as pieces began clicking into place. "My birthday was in April 1994, conceived in July 1993. My mother would have told me, would she?" "You didn't know about Richard Halloway until today?" I shook my head, desperate to reject what he was suggesting. And that's a massive if. Your father had an affair with my mother. That doesn't mean I found this in his journal." Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, and handed it to me. The screen showed a photograph of a young man with Ethan's same amber eyes standing beside a younger version of my mother. They were laughing, his arm around her shoulders, the backdrop a rustic cabin beside a lake. "Look at the date stamp," Ethan said softly, "July 1994. My mother's final words echoed in my head. "And ask him about July 1994. Ask him about the cabin and what he did." This doesn't prove anything," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. It proves they knew each other Tazage, and it proves to here's more to the story than either of us have been told. He ran a hand through his dark hair. I should go. Zoe will be wondering where I am. As he headed for the door, a thought struck me. Ethan, wait, if what you are suggesting is true, if your father and my mother were involved, then why would she want me to take you away from Zoe? It doesn't make sense. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. I know she knew something we don't, something about the Halloways. His eyes met mine, filled with a confusion that mirrored my own. Whatever it is, I think we need to find out. Together, after he left, I returned to the blue box, sifting through its contents with new purpose. Beneath the stack of letters, I found a small journal with a faded leather cover. As I opened it, a photograph slipped out, the same one Ethan had shown me on his phone. But with one crucial difference, in this version, Richard Halloway stood slightly apart from the couple, watching them with an expression that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't love or jealousy in his eyes, it was triumph. I spent the next 3 days avoiding Zoe's calls and diving deeper into my mother's hidden past. Her journal entries from 1993 painted a picture I could barely reconcile with the woman who raised me. A young woman torn between two men, one she loved passionately, James Harrison, Ethan's father, and one who offered security and status, Richard Halloway. The more I read, the more confused I became. If Mom had loved James so deeply, why had she ended up with neither man? And why had she kept silent about Richard being my father for 29 years? On the 4th day, my doorbell rang just as I was piecing together a timeline of events. I opened the door to find Zoe standing on the porch, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled, her eyes rimmed with red. 3 days, she said, pushing past me into the hallway. 3 days of ignored calls and cryptic texts. What the hell has asked? Guilt washed over me. In my obsession with uncovering the truth, I had forgotten that to Zoe I was simply avoiding my best friend during a time of grief. I'm sorry, I said lamely. I've been processing what? Because whatever it is, we're supposed to do it together. That's what we've always done. She followed me into the living room, then stopped short when she saw the papers spread across the coffee table. What is all this? I hesitated, but there was no avoiding this conversation now. Zoe, here's something I need to tell you, and it's going to be a shock. Her face paled. Because he's been acting weird too, and if you two are no, God no. I guided her to the couch. Ethan and I are not having an affair. This is about our parents, MVH, your father. I showed her the DNA test results first. She read them 3 times, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally a dawning horror. This is a mistake, she whispered. It has to be. My father would never. He did. I handed her my mother's journal, open to the most revealing entry from August 1993. He and my mother had an affair while he was already married to your mom. I am the result. Zoe's hands trembled as she read, her face growing paler by the second. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. So we're sisters, actual sisters. Despite everything, I felt a small smile tug at my lips. Half. Sisters. Technically, why didn't they tell us all these years? Her voice broke. We could have been a real family. The question had haunted me too, until I'd found the entry from October 1993. Because your father made my mother a deal, he would provide financial support for me anonymously through a trust if she never told anyone I was his daughter. Tepwa, not you or your mother. That's horrible, Zoe breathed. But it doesn't explain why your mom suddenly wanted you to. She trailed off, her eyes widening. Wit, is this why she asked you to take Ethan away from me? Because we're sisters, and she thought it would be wrong for you to be sisters-in-law. I hesitated. This was the moment to tell her everything about James Harrison, about the possibility that Ethan might be my half-brother instead of my future brother-in-law. But the devastation on her face held me back. How much could one person absorb in a single day? I don't know exactly why she asked, that I said carefully, but I've been thinking a lot about it, and I would never do anything to hurt you, Zoe. You know that, right? She nodded slowly, but something in her eyes had changed, a wariness that had never been there before. I should talk to my father, get his side of this. Of course I reached for her hand, but she pulled away slightly. Do you want me to come with you? Number. She stood up abruptly. I need to do this alone and Tacy's. I think we both need some space to process this. I'll call you once I've talked to my dad, as she headed for the door. I called after her, Zoe. Wait, here is something else you should know. I hesitated, then pushed forward. Ethan and I have been talking about all this. He found some old photographs of his father with my mother from around the same time. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. You've been discussing our family secrets with my fiancé behind my back? Put that way, it sounded terrible. It's not like that. His family is connected to this somehow. We're just trying to understand. No, she cut me off, her voice suddenly hard. You don't get to shut me out for days and then team up with my fiancé to investigate my father. That's not how this works. Her eyes glistened with tears. I thought we were best friends, Tassie's sisters, even before we knew we actually were. But this feels like betrayal. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. I sank onto the couch, surrounded by the scattered remnants of secrets kept too long, wondering if I just lost the only real family I had left. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Sin, did you tell Zoe everything? Asterisk, I typed back. But not about your father, just that Richard is my biological dad. She's upset. Asterisk, his response came quickly. And she just called me. She's headed to her parents' house. I am going there too. This is spiraling, Tazich. Tryst, before I could reply, another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. And you think you know the whole story, but you don't. Meet me at Lakeside Cabin tomorrow at noon if you want the truth about your father and about Ethan. Asterisk, a chill ran down my spine. The cabin. The same one from the photograph. Diab, who is this? Asterisk. I typed back. The response was immediate and chilling. Someone who was there that July 7 who knows what Richard Halloway really did to James Harrison. Asterisk, the Lakeside Cabin looked exactly as it had in the photograph, a rustic wooden structure nestled among towering pines, somewhat weathered, but still charming. The only major difference was the silver Bitabinti parked in the gravel driveway, gleaming incongruously against the natural setting. I checked my phone one last time, no new messages from Zoe or Ethan, and nothing further from my mysterious contact. After a moment's hesitation, I stepped out of my car and approached the cabin. The door opened before I could knock, and I found myself face to face with Patricia Halloway, Zoe's mother and Richard's wife of 35 years. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come, she said, her voice as elegant and composed as ever. Please, come in, Tazix, stunned. I followed her inside. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, a large living area with windows overlooking the lake, a stone fireplace and furniture that looked both expensive and deliberately rustic. You sent the text, I said, still trying to process this development. But why? And how do you even have this place? Patricia gestured for me to sit on the sofa while she took an armchair opposite. This cabin has been in my family for generations. Your mother and I were friends in college, did you know that? I shook my head speechless. We lost touch after graduation, but when Richard brought her around in 1983, introducing her as a new colleague at the hospital, I was delighted. Her smile was sad, at least until I realized what was happening between them. You knew about the affair, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course I knew, just as I knew about Catherine and James Harrison. She smoothed her linen pants with a practiced gesture. What you don't understand yet is that Richard orchestrated all of it. What do you mean? Patricia stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. She returned with a folder and handed it to me. Your mother wasn't the only woman Richard was involved with. He had a pattern: find vulnerable women, charm them, use them for whatever he needed, then discard them. But Catherine was different. I opened the folder to find what appeared to be medical records, specifically toxicology reports. I don't understand. James Harrison didn't die in a car accident as everyone believes. He was poisoned slowly, methodically, with a substance that mimicked the symptoms of a rare autoimmune disease. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was too late. Patricia's voice remained eerily calm. Richard was his doctor, and James was about to expose Richard's medical malpractice. Horror washed over me as the implications became clear. Richard murdered Ethan's father. He arranged for James's accident shortly after James began asking questions about several patient deaths, patients who had lodged complaints against Richard. She nodded at the folder. Your mother suspected something was wrong. She'd been a nurse at the same hospital. That's why she left town so suddenly after James died. She was afraid. My mind reeled. Does Ethan know any of this number? And neither does Zoe. I've protected them from the truth about Richard for their entire lives. Her eyes, the same shape and color as Zoe's, held mine. But now you are here asking questions, stirring up the past. And then Ethan found those photographs. Why tell me now? Why not go to the police with this evidence? Patricia laughed bitterly. Evidence? What evidence? Richard is meticulous. These toxicology reports are copies I stole from his home office years ago. The originals were lost in a convenient lab fire. It would be my word against his, the bitter wife making wild accusations. I stared at her, sudden understanding dawning. You want me to help you expose him? That's why you texted me? Yes, but not just that. She leaned forward, her expression intense. I need you to understand why your mother asked what she did on her deathbed. You know about that, I gasped. Catherine called me from the hospital the day before she died. She just received confirmation of what she'd suspected for years, that Richard had killed James. Patricia's voice softened. She didn't want you to take Ethan away from Zoe out of some romantic notion. She wanted you to warn him, to protect him from Richard. She knew Ethan had been asking questions about his father's death, and she feared history might repeat itself. A car door slammed outside, interrupting our conversation. Patricia tensed. Are you expecting someone? No, I said, moving to the window. My heart sank when I saw Richard Halloway striding toward the cabin, his face tight with anger. Behind him, looking confused and upset, were Zoe and Ethan. This changes everything, Patricia murmured, gathering the papers quickly. They weren't supposed to be here. Not yet. Not until you understood everything. What do we do? I asked, panic rising in my chest. We tell them the truth, she said grimly. All of it. Before Richard can spin another web of lies. The door burst open and Richard stood there, his imposing figure blocking the afternoon light. Well, he said, his voice deceptively calm, isn't this a cozy little gathering? His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw what my mother must have seen all those years ago. Not the distinguished surgeon or the respected patriarch, but something cold and calculating that made my blood run cold. Hello, father, I said the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. I believe we have a lot to discuss. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a scalpel as Richard Holloway looked between his wife and me, his expression darkening by the second. Patricia, he said, his voice dangerously soft. What exactly have you been telling Taz? It's the truth, she replied, lifting her chin. Zoe pushed past her father, her eyes wild. What is going on? Dad, Tess, it says she's your daughter, that you had an affair with her mother. Is it true? Richard's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, perhaps. It's complicated, Zoe. Perilous relationships often are. That's not an answer, Ethan said, moving to stand beside Zoe. Sir, with all due respect. We deserve the truth. You deserve nothing, Richard snapped, then immediately composed himself. I apologize, this is unexpected. Yes, Catherine Donovan and I had a brief relationship nearly 30 years ago, and yes, it appears Persis is my biological daughter. I only confirmed this recently myself. Liar, Patricia hissed. You've known since before she was born, just as you've known exactly what happened to James Harrison. At the mention of this name, Ethan stiffened. What about my father? What does he have to do with this? I moved to stand beside Patricia, clutching the folder of toxicology reports. Ethan, your father didn't die in an accident according to these reports. He was poisoned slowly over time. And your father's doctor was Richard Holloway? Ethan's face drained of color. That's not possible. It's slander is what it is, Richard said, advancing into the room. Patricia has been unstable for years, imagining conspiracies, fabricating evidence. I protected her out of love, but this has gone too far. Mom, Zoe looked at her mother, confusion and fear warring on her face. Is Dad right? Have you been sick? Patricia laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. Your father has been gaslighting me for decades, darling, making me question my own sanity when I discovered his affairs, his falsified research, his other activities. Richard turned to me, his expression suddenly fatherly and concerned. T.S. I understand you are grieving. Catherine's death was a tragedy, and now you've been pulled into Patricia's delusions. But think carefully about what you are doing. You've just found a sister in Zoe. Do you really want to destroy your chance at having a family based on these wild accusations? His words were reasonable, his tone gentle, but something in his eyes made my skin crawl. I thought of my mother's spinal plea, of the fear that had driven her to keep silent for decades, of the loathing in her voice when she spoke of Richard. If you are innocent, I said, matching his calm tone, then you won't mind explaining why your signature is on all these toxicology reports that were supposedly lost in a lab fire? Or why you prescribed medications to James Harrison that when combined would produce exactly the symptoms he died from? Ethan moved forward, reaching for the folder. Enough, Richard growled, dropping the facade of concern. Patricia, I've tolerated your paranoia for the sake of our daughter, but this ends now. He turned to Zoe. Sweetheart, your mother has been unwell for some time. She's fabricated this entire conspiracy because she can't accept that I had a brief indiscretion decades ago. Don't listen to him, Zoe, I pleaded. Think about it. Why would your mother keep this secret all these years if she was just being paranoid? Why would my mother warn me about your father on her deathbed? Zoe looked between us all, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to believe anymore. I just found out my best friend is my sister, and now you are saying my father is a murderer. He is, Ethan said quietly, having flipped through the reports. These match what I found in my father's journal, the symptoms, the timeline, everything. He looked up at Richard, his expression hardened with grief and rage. You killed my father because he was going to expose your malpractice, didn't you? Richard's demeanor changed instantly. The mask of concerned father and husband dropped away, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. What I did was protect my reputation, my career, and my family. James was going to destroy everything I'd built based on a few unfortunate incidents, Patricia repeated incredulously. You call 5 patient deaths incidents collateral damage in the pursuit of medical advancement, Richard said dismissively. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Zoe stumbled backward as if she'd been slapped. Dad, are you admitting to this, to killing Ethan's father, to causing patient deaths? Richard's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. Zoe, darling, you have to understand. The work I was doing was revolutionary. Those patients were terminal anyway. And James, he was weak, sentimental. He couldn't see the bigger picture. And my mother? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Where did she fit into your bigger picture? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Catherine was an unexpected complication. She was supposed to be a simple distraction for James, something to keep him occupied while I dealt with the complaints. But then she got pregnant with you, and simultaneously she started putting pieces together about the patients. So you threatened her? Patricia finished. For Hatter, if she ever came forward, you'd make sure she lost custody of Tazich. Richard shrugged. It worked, didn't it? She stayed quiet for nearly 3 decades. Until she was dying, I whispered. Until she had nothing left to lose. The cabin fell silent as the full weight of his confession settled over us. Richard seemed almost relieved, as if unburdening himself of these secrets had lifted a weight from his shoulders. So what now? He asked, looking between us. You go to the police with the decades-old allegations and circumstantial evidence my lawyers would have it dismissed before charges could be filed? He smiled thinly. I acknowledge Tazich as my daughter. I make generous provisions for her in my will. We all agreed to put the past behind us. You are insane, Ethan breathed. You think we can just forget that you murdered my father, I think, Richard said calmly, that you are engaged to my daughter, that you are about to become part of this family. And families protect their own, don't they? None of us noticed that Zoe had slipped away during this exchange until she stepped back into the room. Her face was tear-stained but oddly calm, and in her hand was an old hunting rifle that must have been stored somewhere in the cabin. Zoe, Richard said carefully, put that down, sweetheart. You are not the person I thought you were, she said, her voice eerily steady. My entire life has been built on lies. You've hurt so many people, Dad. You killed Ethan's father. You threatened Asaj's mother. You threatened Asanda's mother. You manipulated Mom for decades. Zoe, please. Patricia moved toward her, doused.